Hello, this is a true story about a gentleman named Peter and his wife named Frances. There was a young couple who lived in Rhodesia and they were travelling from South Africa. There wasn't US buffs, they never read books about it. And after this story, what I'm about to tell you, which they described fully, they never told any more stories about UFOs, never tried to contact media and made money from it, no, nothing. So it's unusual if there was fibbing not to continue with it. And so here goes. It's a great story. I've got to say, it's everything in it. And it's very juicy, I think. But anyway, off they go. It was 1974. They were driving an old Peugeot 404 and they just filled it up with fuel. And they'd done about 12 kilometres. And, it was all steady. There was nothing happening. And then suddenly his wife looked out the window as her husband were driving, and Frances remarked, says, "Oh, that's bright over there." So, what's that? She thought it was something sapping the sun, it's very odd, She said that's how it coming over the horizon. And as she noticed, she mentioned to her husband Peter, and he couldn't take his eyes off the road, and she got closer and thought, "Oh, what's that?" And suddenly another one appeared. She said, "Well, I don't know what that is anyway." And it got so close, I thought, then what is that? Anyway, she mentioned to her husband, and he still couldn't see it because they were driving. And then she lost sight of it. And then they went round the corner and rode-beside it. It's there. It's practically in front of them. So they slowed down, and then it came to one side. These lights, both the lights came to one side, and then it started up again. And they didn't lose any power of the engine. Only thing what happened was the lights went really dim. They worked, but they were very dim, so you had to slow down. The radio worked perfectly. The radio was on all the while and never had interference. This is quite interesting fact later. It really is. Anyway, they kept on going, and his wife said, "Well, they're following us on parallel to where we are." And he slowed down. He thought, "Blimey, what's going on here?" And as they went going along, all they both describe as if they wasn't on Earth. And this way it gets odd. Before then, they started to get cold. Not excessively cold, but it got cold. But suddenly, when they were looking round and they're looking at the light at the side of them, it had gone. And then they just noticed a very beam of yellowy bright light. They described it as light because they wasn't even sure what it was. It was just described as like a beam. There was described light, but we're not sure what it was. Anyway, they didn't have any sensation that they'd been lifted up. They just had a sensation there was away from Earth. It said there was very hard to describe. And they were looking out at window and looked at the speedometer, and the speedometer still said they were speeding, still flying down the road. But they didn't recognise anything where they were, as if the old ambience of what they were looking at had changed. The picture, as if it was all wrong. It was not as if it was in some sort of video game, but not actual there. And it was because they felt like they were driving. In fact, it says the car went on its own as if it was like neutral. You could take his hands off and think, "What's going on here?" But it was still, the motor was still speeding. Anyway, they kept looking and looking around and just looking out the window. So we don't recognise anything, as if they're not on Earth. All the stars and the sky looked totally different. And they knew this bright light sort of around them. And then suddenly the radio, normal channel radio, but they listened to some classic music from one of the radio shows, and that voice had changed. Then it wasn't a voice they recognised on the radio. Anyway, so it went off like this for a bit, and then suddenly, without them knowing at all, without them knowing what had gone off, nothing. Suddenly, there was then freezing, by the way. They were absolutely freezing. They had to wrap up with blankets. Everything what they had in car, they were wrapping themselves up, even though this bright light was around them. And they thought it's odd because it should be hot now. It's getting warmer this time of day. And literally, they were freezing. And they're still the same situation. They didn't know where they were and they couldn't recognise anything, but the car looked like it was flying, doing about 130, 140 kilometres per hour, and by itself, I could take hands off its steering wheel. But then suddenly, they're on the road and they're just pulling up towards the checkpoint. And the checkpoint guys come out to them and said, "Where you been to? Antarctic?" Because they've seen all the clothes and literally they were boiling, instantly boiling. It was lovely. The sun was out just as it should be. The amount of times where they should be at a time it took them, the sun was out and it was a beautiful day, and sort of from being dark and freezing and the bright light had gone. No two lights, they'd all gone, and they both thought, have we? What's gone on there? We just fell asleep or something, because suddenly that this checkpoint, and the fella said, "What do you know? Are you a bit hot?" So anyway, they didn't know what to say, so they took everything off, and his wife Frances looks through the checkpoint gatehouse window, and you see it 8:30, and on their watches it's 7:30 on the clock. It's 7:30, and everything was normal apart from this little experience. I thought, but it just, they knew something had gone wrong. Anyway, he thought, I better go and fill up. He looked at his fuel gauge and it says full. I thought, that can't be right. I've travelled 260 kilometres. So he pulled over. He put about 20 something cents in it, as if that was equivalent. He'd only done the 12 kilometres, I think it was, before those bright lights came. Anyway, he couldn't explain any of this. He and his wife didn't know what to do. They didn't really talk to him because they thought, well, what can we do? We've lost 2 hours, or so many hours, or an hour, whatever it was, and got to this place, and we didn't use no fuel. It's all, time is all gooey. Anyway, a few weeks went by, and then they saw a chap do an article saying, "Have you got any UFO reports on that area? Because there've been some sightings. Please contact us." And hesitantly, they both went and said, "Look, yeah, we have." They told them their story, and he believed them. He said, "Well, fascinating story," and they told them everything. Never had any UFO stories before. Well, not together anyway. They'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, he said, "Would you mind seeing hypnosis?" So I said, "Yeah, sure, I don't mind." Anyway, but his wife couldn't remember anything. But his husband says there's a reason for it. And he says, "What do you mean?" Anyway, he went into hypnosis, and it was a chap called Dr. Paul Obstrick. And he had that hypnosis done in 1974 in December, and by a doctor. So all legitimate, all recorded. And they went through all the questions and everything else, and this way it all came out, a little bit more details. It turns out this Peter, he did have some contact with humans before, with alien-looking humans, what shall I say? And they said, "Well, but what are they?" And the doctor asked. He says, "Well, they can be anything you want them to see," they told me. So he built the questions up on that. So I went back to the questions about the sighting recently and said, "Well, what were they like in what you saw?" He said, "Well, the aliens beings says, we're going to project something in your image, whatever you want us to look like, and we're going to beam something back your car. Well, all this, what he telling now, he didn't know until he had hypnosis treatment done. And it turns out what was happening, the voice on the radio had interfered with his wife's ability to remember anything at all, but he was allowed to. And it was like a special voice what they were using or some frequency. And he said, "We're going to reject one of us back your seat in your car." This is what's happening when he was up there, when he was actually beamed up. And so we're going to sit back in your car and we're going to just look at you and, and basically ask you some questions. And that's what they did. And said, "Well, what will you look like?" He says, "We're going to look like anything you want us to look like. If you want us to look like a monster, we'll look like a monster. Anything." So he did. And that's why he's saying, but he projected him look like a human, a small human being. But like you said, he doesn't know what they really look like. See, it's just what he thought in his mind, and that's how they do it. Anyway, so a little bit, he asked a few more questions. He says, "Well, did you see the craft?" He says, "Yes, I did. It was 60 feet high and about 80 to 90 feet long." And it says, even though we didn't go inside the craft, we were just in the beam, what was holding it, they saw it clearly. They could see through the windows and they could see it had 3 floors. They could see the propulsion system at the bottom floor. The middle floor had a living accommodation, and the whole third floor was control room, and that was it. And so they described everything, and went on to more questions. And he asked them a lot of questions, and he says, "Well, how did they move around?" He said, "Well, they moved around in the spaceship exactly how they basically got them there." It says it's in a vacuum. The alien beings just moved around, didn't walk, they just like sort of offered in their own little vacuum space, and that's how they moved around. And he says that's how they control us. They control, they manipulate what, if you, when they're in the car, the space around them, they manipulated the space like his wife thought she was in the car. And anybody gets taught to manipulate wherever you're in a mountain or Florida or Wiltshire, wherever you want to be, or in a bus stop, wherever, they manipulate that space and project that you're still there. And that's what they're doing. That's how they were part of the propulsion system, because it wasn't just fabricating a movement, they're fabricating space itself. So and time. So anyway, they asked a few more questions, and says, "Well, how do you know these things? Your wife didn't." And Peter went on and says, "It's simply because he was allowed to remember, and his wife wasn't. They wanted him to remember because it came out then in 1964. He did have a contact with a UFO, and similar sort of thing happened, but not in a car. Suddenly, he got questioned by these beings who actually said the same sort of thing, and and that story was when he was with his father in '64. Same sort of scenario. They were going around a bend in their van, carrying lots of electric equipment. Anyway, they had a time lapse, and they couldn't explain. They went back, took all the electric gears to who was supposed to be buying to a shop, and all the diodes and wire, it would all broke. It would all burn out. They had to go back and replace many of the electrical items. And so, but he says him and his father never spoke about it at all. That was '64. This some years before this story what came about. So he says father said no. He said it affected his father in many ways, but he would never talk about it. And he couldn't talk about this one in '74 to him. He just didn't want to know. He couldn't cope with it. Didn't want to know. So he had nobody to tell except these media people, and who sent him to this hypnosis. And that's when he had the first contact with the being. It turns out And when these beings was checking him over, and this is in 7 minutes, they already knew he had contact with them. So that was good. I mean, it was so he interacted with them there, and that's what he got to know about the lift system. He knew there were 2 lifts inside the craft, what were vacuum, so that's how they went up and down. There wasn't actually a lift up and down. There was just again a vacuum, so they would go up and down into the vacuum space, and they didn't just materialise. And the propulsion system, it only had 2 thrusts, one up, one down. The other ones were just stabilisers. They just to give it a bend left and right. There wasn't to shoot everywhere. It just over the, like say, one up, one down, and then just to tilt, fly off. And in the spaceship, it describes it as a lab, where the actual manipulise the space, the surroundings, as the volume what was in the beam. They could change it to suit whatever the being, whatever they've got hold of from there to around there, and that's part of the propulsion system where they want to move somewhere. So they don't just fly; they can actually picture it and pop, they go, like instantaneous. So yeah, there's a lot going on, but he says the propulsion system as well, the control tower, wasn't all hands on. It was Astra. They did it through the mind. It was so a lot of details came back from the propulsion systems, the size of the craft, and everything. It was immense. Most I've ever heard for the details of it all. I don't think I've ever heard so much details of the propulsion system of a UFO. Anyway, they went on and they lived a happy life together, and they told the story. The doctor checked them out and says it's 100% true. Yeah, like I say, it was a beautiful story. Nobody could explain the fuel, the distance, and nobody at all. There's years, some months after, they checked up and see if he's all right. One of the media people, and he says, "Yeah, I'm fine. I just keep getting headaches." His wife's fine, no headaches at all. But he says he was getting headaches and dizziness for quite some months after. And also the peculiar thing about it is his car. He says he bought these tyres. He'd advised him not to get them retreads as well. It last about 1,200 kilometres, I think he said. But since then, he's done 4,000 kilometres on the tyres, and they look brand new. Brand, as if he just put them on. I don't know anything about these tyres or how they work, but I think they cut them again, and but he says they look exactly the same as when he had them done, which was 4,000 kilometres, and they shouldn't do. He says they don't. He says his wife says he wants to change them because they don't grip as good because they're cheap tyres, but because they're lasting, he's going to keep them on. I mean, engine started to go. It's an old car, but it's acting all right. The radio turned to normal channel when he returned. So it's just the tyres. Somehow it's affected the rubber on the tyres will not wear. Nobody can explain it. Not nobody. He's had them checked and says, yeah, they're just not wearing, these tyres aren't. So, which is good for him, but it'd be good to know why that is, because I always thought rubber would just wear off. And so, but yeah, there's a lot of mystery going on. It was a brilliant story. If you do find more things about it than me, please let me know. Or pictures. I've never been to Rhodesia, so if you know where this place is, better near Salisbury or something, in Rhodesia, going towards South Africa. I've seen pictures and I've tried Googling it. It looks a lovely place, I have to say. But if anybody knows more about this story, please let me know. It'd be brilliant. I don't know if anybody's still alive. They're probably gone, unfortunately, now. But yeah, it's a perfectly story, perfectly true story. Exciting, scary, but exciting. But yeah, so it's got the lot. Everything's happened to him. So it turns out it's Gosh. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. It's like I say, a true story. I wish I knew if they were still alive. I'd ask them myself, but I can't. Anyway, God bless. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you. Bye.